Jeanne Martin's wife found his secret love letters. They weren't written to her. She thought she was looking for old tax documents. Instead, Jeanne Martin found something that would destroy 20 years of marriage and reveal the most heartbreaking secret in Hollywood history. Hidden in the bottom drawer of Jeanne Martin's desk were dozens of love letters, written in his careful handwriting, filled with passion she had never seen in their 2 decades together. But as she read the first line, her blood ran cold. These letters weren't addressed to her. They were addressed to Betty McDonald, a woman who had been dead for 15 years. It was a Tuesday afternoon in February 1973. Dean was at the studio recording his television show, and Jeanne was cleaning out his home office. She had been married to the King of Cool for 20 years, had given him 3 children, had stood by him through countless Hollywood storms. She thought she knew everything about the man she had married. She was about to discover that she had been living with a stranger. The first letter was dated just 6 months after their wedding in 1949. Her hands shook as she read Dean's words. "My darling Betty, I married her because I thought it would help me forget you. But every night when I close my eyes, I see your face. Every morning when I wake up next to her, I pretend she's you. This house feels like a beautiful prison, and I'm serving a life sentence for a crime I didn't commit, the crime of surviving when you didn't." Jeanne dropped the letter as if it had burned her fingers. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of cruel joke. But her husband's handwriting was unmistakable, and the pain in every word was authentic. But there were more letters, dozens of them. Some were short notes, others were pages long, all written in Dean's distinctive handwriting, all professing a love so deep and desperate that it made Jeanne feel like she was reading about strangers. "Betty, my sweet Betty, I would give everything I have, everything I am, to hold you one more time. This success, this fame, this life I've built, it's all meaningless without you." Who was Betty McDonald? Jeanne had heard the name whispered occasionally over the years, usually by old-timers who remembered the early days of Dean's career. Betty had been Dean's girlfriend before he became famous, before Hollywood, before everything. She had died in a car accident in 1958, just as Dean was reaching the peak of his success. Jeanne had always assumed Betty was just another ex-girlfriend, a footnote in Dean's romantic history. She never imagined that Betty was the ghost who had been haunting their marriage from the very beginning. The letters spanned their entire marriage. 1950. "I tried to love Jeanne the way I loved you, but my heart belongs to a dead woman." 1955. "Today is our anniversary, Betty. Not my anniversary with her, ours." 1962. "I made another movie today. Sang another song. Everyone thinks I'm living the dream, but I'm just sleepwalking through a nightmare without you." Each letter was more devastating than the last. Dean wrote about their children as if they were obligations rather than joys. "Little Dean Jr. has your eyes, Betty. Sometimes I look at him, and I can almost pretend he's ours." He wrote about his career as if it were a burden. "They call me the King of Cool, but you know the truth. I'm just a broken man playing a role." He wrote about his marriage to Jeanne as if it were a prison. "She tries so hard to make me happy, but how do you love a shadow when your heart is buried in a grave?" Jeanne sat on the floor of Dean's office, surrounded by 20 years of secret letters, crying for the marriage she had never really had. Every kiss, every "I love you," every moment of intimacy they had shared had been a lie. Not a deliberate deception, perhaps, but a lie nonetheless. Dean had been physically present but emotionally absent, going through the motions of marriage while his heart remained with a woman who had been dead for 15 years. She thought about all the times she had tried to reach him, to break through that wall of casual indifference he wore like armor. Now she understood why she had always failed. The most crushing letter was dated on their 10th wedding anniversary in 1959. Betty, today everyone will congratulate me on 10 happy years of marriage. If only they knew the truth. I've been faithful to Jeanne in body, but my soul has been cheating on her every single day. I wake up disappointed that I'm not dead, because being dead would mean being with you. The children ask why Daddy seems sad sometimes. And I have to lie to them too. There were letters written on Christmas mornings while Jeanne was downstairs making breakfast. Betty, they're opening presents and laughing, and all I can think about is the Christmas we planned together, the life we were going to build. That evening, Dean came home from the studio in his usual good spirits. He was humming That's Amore when he found Jeanne sitting in his office, the letters spread across his desk like evidence at a crime scene. The humming stopped. The smile disappeared. The color drained from his face as he saw 20 years of secrets laid bare. For the first time in 20 years of marriage, Jeanne saw genuine emotion on her husband's face. Terror. Jeanne, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. You shouldn't have read those. No, Dean, she replied, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. You should never have written them. At least, not while you were married to me. Dean stood in the doorway, looking smaller than she had ever seen him, the king of cool, the man who faced down mobsters and critics with equal composure, was trembling like a child caught stealing candy. I can explain, he said, though they both knew there was no explanation that could possibly make this better. Explain what? That I've been married to a ghost for 20 years? That every time you told me you loved me, you were lying? That our children have a father who wishes he were dead? Dean stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. Jeanne, I do love you. In my way, I do. Your way? Jeanne's voice was rising now, 20 years of suppressed frustration finding its voice. Your way is loving a dead woman more than your living wife? Your way is writing love letters to someone else while I'm sleeping next to you? Betty was different, Dean said, as if this explanation would somehow comfort the woman whose life he had just destroyed. She knew me before all this, before the fame, before the money, before I became this character. She loved Dean Crocetti from Steubenville, not Jeanne Martin the entertainer. And what does that make me? What does that make our children? Are we just props in the Jeanne Martin show? Dean had no answer because they both knew the truth. Jeanne and the children were his real life, but Betty was his real love. He had built a family with one woman while his heart remained buried with another. I never meant for you to find those letters, Dean said finally, but you kept writing them. For 20 years, Dean. 20 years of pretending I was someone else. 20 years of going through the motions of marriage while your heart was somewhere else. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? Do you know what it's like to feel like you're failing at making your own husband love you? Dean moved to his desk chair, but Jeanne held up a hand to stop him. She couldn't bear to have him sit at the same desk where he had written love letters to another woman while she was making him dinner downstairs. I want to know about her, Jeanne said, surprising herself with the request. If I'm going to understand why I was never enough, I need to know about Betty McDonald. Dean looked like he was going to be sick. Jeanne, don't do this to yourself. Don't do what? Finally learn the truth about my own marriage? It's too late to protect me, Dean. The damage is done. The least you can do is help me understand it. Dean sat heavily in a chair by the window, looking older than his 55 years. Betty was a singer, Not famous, just local clubs around Cleveland. I met her when I was still dealing blackjack and trying to make it as a performer. She believed in me when nobody else did. She supported me when I had nothing to offer except dreams and determination. And you loved her. I loved her more than I thought it was possible to love another human being. She wasn't just my girlfriend, Jeanne. She was my best friend, my partner, my everything. We were going to get married after I got established, after I could give her the life she deserved. But she died. Car accident. Drunk driver hit her head on while she was driving to one of my shows. She was coming to surprise me for my birthday. Dean's voice broke on the last words, and for the first time in their marriage, Jeanne saw her husband cry real tears. Not the calculated emotion he used in his performances, but genuine, raw grief. That was 15 years ago, Dean. 15 years. Grief doesn't follow a schedule, Jeanne. Love doesn't die just because the person does. But marriage is supposed to be about building a new life with someone new. It's supposed to be about choosing to love the person who's with you, not mourning the person who isn't. Dean looked at his wife with something approaching sympathy. I tried, Jeanne. I really tried. But you can't make yourself feel something you don't feel. You can't will your heart to love someone it doesn't love. Then why did you marry me? Because I thought if I went through the motions long enough, the feelings would follow. Because I thought having a family and a normal life would heal the hole Betty left. Because I was afraid of being alone with my grief forever. So you decided to make me alone instead. They sat in silence for several minutes, 20 years of marriage crumbling around them like a house built on quicksand. Finally, Jeanne spoke again. I want you to stop writing the letters. Jeanne, stop writing them, Dean. If you have any love for me at all, if you have any respect for our children, stop writing love letters to a dead woman. Dean nodded slowly. Okay. And I want you to see a psychiatrist. I'm not crazy, Jeanne. You're not crazy, but you're not healthy either. This isn't normal grief, Dean. This is obsession. This is choosing death over life, the past over the present. If you want to save this marriage, if you want to save yourself, you need professional help. Jeanne Martin, who had spent his entire career avoiding anything that resembled vulnerability or weakness, agreed to see a psychiatrist. But the damage was already done. Jeanne had spent 20 years wondering why she felt like a stranger in her own marriage, and now she knew. Dean had spent 20 years wishing he were someone else, somewhere else, with someone else. They tried to make it work for another few years. Dean did stop writing the letters, and he did see a psychiatrist for several months. But you can't rebuild a foundation that was never there in the first place. The marriage that had been built on pretense and resignation couldn't survive the weight of truth and honesty. In 1976, they divorced quietly, without scandal or public drama. Dean moved out of the family home and into a bachelor apartment, finally free to grieve openly for the only woman he had ever truly loved. Jeanne kept the house, the children, and the bitter knowledge that she had been married to a man who had never really belonged to her. Years later, after Dean's death in 1995, Jeanne would tell friends that she didn't hate her ex-husband for loving Betty McDonald more than he loved her. She understood that love isn't something you can control or command, but she did resent the 20 years she had spent trying to compete with a ghost, wondering why she wasn't enough, questioning her own worth as a woman and a wife. Jeanne Martin's greatest performance wasn't on stage or screen. It was the 2 decades he spent pretending to be a loving husband while his heart remained buried in an Ohio cemetery. It was a performance that fooled the world but destroyed the woman who loved him most. The King of Cool had mastered every role except the one that mattered most, being a real husband to a woman who deserved better than sharing her marriage with a ghost.